Welcome back to Making Money Matter, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, I got him back. His name is Greg Hall. He's the Managing Director and CEO of Alligator Energy. ASX code is AGE. Now, some of you may recall, spoke to Greg a year ago. Now, Greg didn't want to come back on until he really had some news to share with all of you, and also, I guess, to confirm that there's value going forward and that Alligator Energy are making great strides. So I saw some news come out, and it was that they have had approval for their retention lease. I'm not going to take all of his thunder away, but I thought it was a great time to get Greg back. So, Greg, really appreciate your time. We're both back from one of the largest resources conferences in Fremantle, which is enormous, and sentiment seemed to be fairly strong there. And every time I walk past your booth, you're pretty busy. So clearly the news has come out. What I want to talk about today, though, is, I guess, overall sentiment for the uranium market. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is all about uranium. And you all know, as much as I'm known as that gold lady, I love uranium. Why? Zero carbon emissions. And I think as a world, we need energy, and we need to approve some of these projects, and we need to understand that going forward, uranium is going to be a key part of the energy mix. And I'm sure you would agree with that, wouldn't you, Greg?
I certainly would. Thank you very much, Kerry. It's nice to chat to you again also.
Always good to chat to you. Before we get into, I guess, the nuts and bolts of Alligator Energy, what's your view on, I guess, the macro outlook for uranium as we sit here in sort of late February 2025?
Look, the fundamental supply-demand story has not changed. It has not changed probably since about 2017, 18, 19. And certainly when 2020 hit and the political support for nuclear power really started to climb, then the various UTF traded funds and Sprott fund came in to buy up the excess spot supply. That really showed the investment market that uranium is becoming a play again. People started to look at the long-term fundamentals and said, we're producing 130 million pound a year around the world, and we're burning 180 million pound in existing reactors, and there's new reactors being built. How can this theme last? And it can't. So therefore, as the spot price moves first, because that's really the reactive price, the price of a deal done today for a 12-month sale, that moves faster. That drove the equities. And then as the long-term price moved, which is really 80% of the sales under direct contract pricing with utilities, as that moved, you had Cameco restarting its operations in Canada. You had Paladin restarting its mine. You've got now Boss Energy restarting, UR Energy in the States, an ISR mine, Peninsula restarting, Encore Energy. So you've had restarts now bringing uranium production back to the fore. It's still only climbed to a level which is still just under current burn-up rates, and there's not taking allowance for future supply. Most nuclear utilities around the world are covered generally 3 years ahead for their fuel supply. So the sort of request for proposals that we are receiving, even as a near developer, are coming out for 2029 material onwards. So that's the way this market works. People contract long-term ahead. They contract 80% of their requirements. A little bit on the spot is traded and sold. But the driver of the market is the long-term price and the long-term fundamental supply. But what really, the spot price can drive investor sentiment. If you've got a short-term investment turnover, well, we've been in this thematic for a while. I don't think it's going to move for 3-6 months. Let's move our money from here over to another commodity. That happens all the time. So we've seen a couple of key run-ups in price, but you're seeing that the long-term price has stayed at that $79, $80 US a pound, which is quite supportive of the restart operations. Probably needs to be a little bit stronger for some of the larger new operations that will come online in the next 10 years or so. So there's some solid fundamentals, a short-term drop in the spot price, but it moves $10 a pound sometimes just on the geopolitical news out of Kazakhstan or Russia or somewhere else. But we're seeing the fundamentals are strong. We're seeing the long-term price is strong. To have a company like ours, which as I'll explain shortly, is some 4 years away from production, to be on the bidders list of European and North American utilities is not something that used to happen in the past.
Do you think, just before we get on to your projects, you're in South Australia, do you think Australia will ever fully embrace the nuclear energy thematic, or do you think we're a long way away from that at the moment? Because we've got brilliant uranium here in Australia.
Yeah, well, look, there's two things that I talk about when I get involved in this. I am involved in nuclear debate off and on, and I like to be. First of all, we should just remove the ban. Quite simply, having a ban on a technology is patently ridiculous. If it's totally uneconomic and will never work, then the market won't build it. But if you remove the ban, over a period of time, you'll have very good, smart nuclear company operators like Vattenfall out of Sweden, which operate multiple reactors, Duke Power out of the States, which operate multiple reactors, EDF, which operate multiple reactors. You can have those enterprises come look at the Australian grid and say, where could a modern, innovative, load-following reactor sit which makes money? Because they ain't going to build it if it's not going to make money. So therefore, it could be in and around where transmission lines already are, like old coal plants. It could be in an area where you go out for interest from communities and communities bid to get the interest to have a nuclear plant, like they're doing in Norway right now. 3 communities are vying for the first to be the potential first nuclear plant in Norway. So there's different ways of approaching it, but let the ban go, let the market decide. The modern nuclear industry is in place and expanding in 20 to 30 countries around the world. Let's see if it could work here. I think that'll take some time. Separate to that, of course, we've been mining and exporting uranium in the modern era, if you like, since 1980, 81, when Ranger started, 88, when Olympic Dam started, 98, when Beverly and then 4 Mile and now Boss. So we've been exporting uranium to Western utilities through Europe, North America, Japan, Korea for many, many years, helping them achieve their clean energy aims. We can do the same.
Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? Helping them clean energy. And also, I think, if I'm right, Greg, it would also help with the cost of energy in this country.
Well, that's what I read a lot about this from certain parties, in particular Aidan Morrison and others, who really look at AEMO's costs. And there's all sorts of ways from different sides of the fence to evaluate costs. I'm not close enough to it.
Right.
I think there's some very smart people out there doing numbers. I think that's what the market can look at and decide when it comes in. If we've got this transmission, if I build this transmission, a nuclear plant, it already lasts 40 years on standard build. You update the control systems, update the safety, it can go 60 years, like it has in the US and Europe now. And now there are approvals going in to try and get nuclear plants running 80 years, because you replace major components, you replace major control systems. So once you get to that stage, you really have the capital paid off and it's working very effectively. So it's got to be evaluated in the right way, and I'm not sure it has been.
Yeah, okay. Interesting times ahead, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm all for it. And let's hope that as Australians, we understand, don't be scared of it. It's clean energy. There's nothing to be frightened of, and we need to be getting on with it. But let's get on with what Alligator Energy are doing down there in South Australia, which is a fantastic jurisdiction. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on today, Greg, was because you've just had approval for your retention lease. Now, what I'd like to find out now, your project is called the Samphire project down in South Australia. Just give us a brief overview of that and why this approval is so important in your continuing advancements.
All right. The Samphire uranium project is 20 kilometres south of Whyalla. It's in some shallow flat-lying sediments. It hosts an in-situ recovery amenable uranium project. And what that means is, instead of physically digging and mining the rock, you solution mine the uranium, which is bound within the sands, and bring it out as a dissolved solution to a plant. You use ion exchange to extract the uranium from that solution, from the saline groundwater, and put it into a clean eluate when you can precipitate and dry and make uranium oxide, or yellowcake. So that's the site we've got and the project type it will be. We have one area of resource at just under 20 million pound, which is a perfect size for an ISR starting operation at, say, 1.2 million pound. And we have a satellite resource, a satellite project area we've already identified. We need to make that into a resource. And we have 90 kilometres plus of buried paleochannel, only 35% of which has been drilled, with uranium in quite a bit of that already. So we have an operation ready to move forward. We spent a few years since we acquired it of getting the resource up to speed, doing bench scale testing of all the process steps and recovery steps. Now the final de-risking of this is a pilot in situ recovery trial in the ground. So 3 rings of holes, operating them one at a time through a pilot process plant, which is built inside containers and operating. Now we already have the pilot process plant fabricated in our yard in Whyalla. The retention lease approved in January with its conditions allow us to operate. We just have to have an operating plan ticked off by the authorities. That's three departments, the Department of Energy and Mining, Department of Water and the EPA in South Australia. We predict that should occur around May, such that we could be constructing June, July. Constructing is basically civil works and the placement of the pilot plant into abundant area in that zone, and then operating that pilot trial. This will give us all the operating parameters we need to move straight into feasibility. During this year, we'll have expressive interest for engineering firms to come into feasibility and watch the operation of the plant as well. So in a nutshell, that's our project. It's expandable. The pilot trial is the final de-risking before you go into feasibility, mine approvals, financing, production.
Talk to us about financing and funding. How are you with funding what we're talking about, this, getting this up and running and getting the trials done?
No, we've got over $20 million in bank at the start of the year. We've already fabricated the pilot plant. We already have the pumps, all the gear we need purchased. It is about then constructing on site, operating the plant and running. And remember, it's a small plant. It's a very small footprint plant, and operating that. So we're well funded to undertake these key steps this year. We'll reduce our other drilling activity while we're doing it, so we're not duplicating up on the site. That also preserves some cash to make sure we run well.
All right. So one of the things that I always ask people is, why you? Why Alligator Energy? I've got a beautiful audience out there, and they're looking for opportunity. There's other uranium companies out there. Why would they look at you guys? Is it because you're further advanced than others? Or, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm scratching my head going, because I've looked at your share price, hasn't really done very much. Sorry to be blunt, but it hasn't. Why should they be looking at you at the moment?
Well, a few reasons. We're in South Australia. South Australia and the Northern Territory are the only 2 jurisdictions where you have bipartisan support at a state level, bipartisan support at a federal level for uranium mining. Yeah, only 2 at the current time. More importantly, even than that, the Western nuclear utilities, their primary focus for long-term contracts at tier 1 level countries or jurisdictions is United States, Canada, Australia, and Namibia. And then you have other areas that come in as second tier. Even Kazakhstan has moved a little bit second tier because of the Russian dominance there. So that's why we are focused on by the international market as well as our investors. The second thing is we're the most advanced. There's no other uranium project in South Australia that has a resource that's this far advanced and about to go under pilot testing, ready to go forward into feasibility. None. So we're the most advanced there. We have expandability. We certainly, in ISR, you tend to get a defined resource that helps you start up a 1 or 1.2 million pound a year project. You don't need to keep drilling then. You can get that project started, and as you advance, you go forward. That's what happened at Beverley. Started at 1.2 million pound, now 4 million pound a year. Okay. Boss Energy's Honeymoon started at 1.2 million pound a year 11 years ago, restarting about that size and expanding to 2.5 million pound a year. The same has occurred in Encore in the Texas area and the Wyoming projects. So we have the footprint to expand. We just don't need to spend the money doing it now. It's better to get into production in an economic way, which we can. And we have the long-term price to support it. We become less fixated on the spot price now, more fixated on the long-term contract price, and that's our shift. Investors still can be driven by the up and down sentiment that comes through on the geopolitics front, on the spot price front. But certainly we are at the stage, if you like, that the Boss Energy was some 4 or 5 years ago. So we are on that advanced path, ready to go through to production.
What's your biggest challenge then at the moment? Because it sounds to me, because I followed the Boss Energy story, they're now in production and underway. And you're not far, are you very far away from them?
Oh, no, we're about 300 kilometres away. So we're close to Whyalla. They are in the Frome embayment area, which is 200 to 300 kilometres to the northeast of us. We're near where those other uranium mines are, right? So that's some distance away. Look, our biggest challenge will be mine approvals. South Australia has approved 5 operating uranium projects, 4 operating ISR projects. The last one approved 11 years ago. It still takes time. You've got to do the baseline hydrogeology, the baseline flora fauna. Now, we've done all of that. We have to take that forward into the departments, as I said, the Department for Energy and Mining, the Department for Water, the EPA. Each of them have had turnover. So you've got new professionals and approval officers in those areas which have not gone through a process of approval of a uranium project. So there's a real understanding that they have to get. There's some long-lived expertise in those groups, but it's not always there. So there has to be an increased understanding. You also have changes in legislation that can occur. For example, in the past, hypersaline water, groundwater like where we are, would not be considered a resource, whereas now it is considered a potential future water resource. So there are some changes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Hypersaline, why would that even be considered a future water resource? Because they use a desalination.
Well, pragmatically speaking, it wouldn't be, because it's 80 metres deep and it's 40,000 parts per million salts or deeper. It doesn't interact with the surface or the Gulf waters or anything. And the ocean is only 4 or 5 kilometres away. That's going to be the source of RO water for reverse osmosis plants well before any groundwater is. But nonetheless, there is still legislation that recognises water sources and where they are. And we have a requirement to make sure that at the end of mining, we use that saline water as the medium of mining. At the end of mining, it must return to near its original state. So that's important. Okay, so all of those things are part of the approval process that we go through. Now, every other ISR mine has gone through this.
Right.
So it's a matter of time, technology, science, and then approval processes. And that's going to be a challenge. Our critical path will be the approval into production.
Just going back to the water situation, because it's in situ mining, does that mean you don't need another, like the water's there? It's like putting it in really simple terms, because I'm not a uranium specialist.
Correct. Yeah. We utilise the existing saline groundwater as our medium of mining. It's the dominant water that we use. That's it. We have a small water supply, freshwater pipeline that will come from Whyalla, because the back end of the plant, you need some wash water, and you need it for showers and rooms. So you need some wash water for the back end of the plant when you're making the final product. Okay. But it's not you don't use a massive amount of fresh water at all.
What about power? Do you need power, and have you got access to power? I mean, these are all things that are going through my head.
Yeah, no, we do.
Closer.
Well, the good thing about if you have a normal hard rock mine where you dig up the rock and you have to crush and grind it, you could have a 25 megawatt mill doing that, a massive mill. We don't have any of that. We don't dig up rock, we don't crush it, we don't grind it. We have pumps and tanks. Right. So our power draw for this level of operation we're talking about is probably about 2 megawatt. We'll probably do a 5 megawatt power line from Whyalla out to the site. It's 25 kilometres, the power is available. And of course, it's available in renewable power as well as other sources. So power creates an opportunity for us, because if we can do backup generation on site, which is non-diesel but other sources, then we might be able to be totally renewable supply as well. But we'll be checking on that as we go through this process. But no, the power usage for an ISR mine is not high.
And ISR, by the sound of it, would also be a cheaper way of extracting uranium than the hard rock? It
is, because you have less capital up front for construction and operations. You do, though, when you're doing, because you're doing it by remote, you've got drill holes and rings, and you're pulling out the sand, you're circulating fluids. and you get on average about 70% extraction of the uranium in the sands. Every ISR mine is around 70 or 80% extraction.
Okay.
A hard rock mine, if you go through a process, can be higher than that. But it's cheaper to start, cheaper to operate. So the all-in sustaining cost can be quite effective. And in situ recovery mining generally is the cheapest form of uranium mining around the world, apart from the very, very high-grade mines in Canada that Cameco run.
Right. Okay. From what I understand, feasibility needs to be done.
Yes.
When's that going to be done?
We'll be going out for expressions of interest for engineering firms to undertake the feasibility in the second quarter, with a view that at some stage through the third quarter, mobilising an initial team while we're doing the field recovery trial, because that way that engineering team can see the field pilot trial operations, the reagent usage, the methodologies, all of that can be then and evident, and we'll get then the results out of that feeding straight into the team running the feasibility. So that'll be on from the middle of the second half and go through into 2026. It's probably about a 12-month task to do a good solid feasibility of this style of plant. The sort of companies that will be able to do this they might have done uranium plants before, but in particular, they might do any fluid flow sort of plant, such as a lithium plant or any plant which is using a chemical process rather than crushing and grinding rock.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's plenty of expertise in Australia in this area.
Is Boss Energy in situ? Or is
yes,
that
it is. It's very similar. So Boss Energy, Heathgate Resources at Beverley 4 Mile, and our project are all in situ recovery mines.
And you said we're pretty advanced, for about 4 years behind Boss. So are you following a similar path to Boss Energy? Because I'm looking at that.
Well,
I remember there was a lot of shareholder value as they came.
yeah, well, you've got to remember they had one key advantage. They already had a previous approved mining lease when they were first operating 11 years before. Then they into hiatus period, but the mining lease still applied. They just had to make adjustments to the operating plan and the process within that. So they had that advantage, which is great. But even allowing for that, yeah, they had to go through some changes in their mine plan and approvals, and we have to go through a mining lease approval.
Yeah, so you've got to go through the feasibility, through the mine approval, get into financing, and then finally get into production. We're looking at
the only difference between us is that depth of approval that they went through compared to us.
Right, got it. Now, I didn't want to finish up without mentioning the fact that you've also moved up to the Cooper Basin, which is interesting. Is that a new discovery in the Cooper Basin?
It certainly is. So the big Lake uranium discovery is in the sediments overlying the oil and gas basin, the Cooper Basin, where Santos, Beach, Delhi, and many other companies have operated for many, many years. And it's a production centre for condensate, oil and gas. But the sediments which host the Beverley 4 Mile deposits all extend to the east and to the northeast. Up over there, you can clearly see those sediments come down towards the Honeymoon project. They go north to or east to the Oban project and north to where we are. So the reason we picked this project up in about 2019-20, it eventually got ended on the ground drilling only last year. It took a while with COVID shutting down most access. Nearly all the large uranium in situ recovery fields in the world are associated with oil and gas basins of some type. So Kazakhstan is an oil and gas basin. Wyoming is gas and coal. Texas is oil and gas. And the simple reason for this is you quite often get in these basins the overlying sediments, which can have uranium fluids passing through them, and you have leakage of hydrocarbon gas. And that is a reductant. So the uranium solution will stay in an oxidized state in solution. And if it hits a reductant like a carbon or leaf matter or hydrocarbon gas, it'll react and drop out as a solid. So forms then a roll front type or tabular type uranium deposit where the uranium comes out of solution and forms a solid. And that's what we have at Samphire. And that's what Honeymoon, Beverley have. And that's what we've now found, we believe, in the sediments above the Cooper Basin. So Big Lake, we drilled the first drilling last year, and the first drilling found thicknesses between 10 to 30 metres of paleotantal sands at about 120 metre depth. Whether they're pure paleochannels or sheet flow sands, we're not sure, but they have groundwater, they are permeable, they contain low-grade uranium, 100 to 120, 130 part per million. Now, that's a massive amount of uranium when it's spread over 20, 30 meters. It's equivalent because when you're talking about in situ recovery uranium, you multiply the grade by the thickness. So 100 part per million at 20 meters is about the same as 1 meter at 1,000, 2,000 part per million. So it's potentially economic even as it is. However, we need to find more consistent areas. And this is a first discovery. We now have a kilometre squared area around that cleared for some deeper drilling and some rotary mud drilling for better accuracy with our tools. Plus, we've got other targets. And we have about a third of the basin covered with mineral tenements. And so we're having a look over the rest of that as well. So it's a potentially new field. And the formation models, there's still debate about what's the formation model of this. We don't know yet. So there's a lot of work to do to try and make that happen as well.
As a potential investor, I'm kind of sitting here going, well, why wouldn't you just focus on what you got your hands on already? Because haven't you got enough on your hands?
Well, as a potential investor for the future, when you're producing uranium to sell to a nuclear utility and paying a dividend, it's great to have more than one source of supply. Nuclear utilities,
okay,
uranium is only 5% of their cost base, but they can't afford to be without it. So they're willing to pay a premium for a long-term contract. And if the company that has that long-term contract has two sources of supply, so much the better. And two sources of supply in great jurisdictions, so much the better. That's why, you'll probably see some M&A activity happen over time as you see projects with one project operating might expand and pick up other ones. But certainly, nuclear utilities love it when they're dealing with a company that has 2 or 3 mines operating. So that's a primary task for us to achieve over the long term, we think.
Got it. All right, we're running out of time, Mr. Hall. So tell me 3 reasons they should be sitting up and taking notice. I think we've covered it really well. Congratulations on getting the retention lease approval. I think that's a big. Would you agree? Big tick.
Oh, it's a big plus. That takes us through this pre-development stage this year and into development of the project.
Yeah. Okay. So that's why I wanted to get him back on, ladies and gentlemen, because I do think that this is a big milestone that they've ticked. 3 reasons they should be sitting up and taking notice. We've mentioned one.
Okay, we're going to totally de-risk the project technically this year and move into feasibility study. We have expandability in our resource. We'll be working on that the next 2 years to rapidly do that. And we are already engaged with the nuclear utilities who want to buy our product from 2029-30 onwards, and we'll be ready to put contracts in place when we need to.
And they've got cash in the bank, ladies and gentlemen. Look, I think it's just flown under the radar. And you know what I'm like. I like to find these one for you. As I always say, do your own research. But I think that, as I said before, that with the retention lease approval, that's a massive tick for these guys to get underway. And if you don't believe me, why don't you give Greg a call? I'm sure he'd love to chat to you. Hit the like and the subscribe button, ladies and gentlemen. Share this with other people. Uranium is going to be a strong future for energy supply going forward. And as Greg said, the reason that they like Big Lake as well as their Samphire is it gives them the optionality. And those that want the uranium love to have more than one project. So congratulations, Greg. Thanks for joining me on Making Money Matter.
Pleasure, Kerry. Thank you.